Okay.
Awesome. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us on this Thursday. My name is Erica Mixon. I am the content manager here at Blumira. Today, we're talking about Sysmon 101, leveling up your Windows security. And we've got two experts on the panel today that I'm really excited to introduce to you. But first, just a few housekeeping things. Feel free to use the Q&A, use the chat as much as you'd like. We'd love for this to be an engaging conversation, and we can bring up questions and answer them as we're able to. And just really looking forward to speaking with you all and hearing some of your feedback and your questions. Today we have, like I said, two experts on the panel for today. We've got Carlos Perez, who's the team lead of research at Trusted Sec. Carlos, it's great to have you.
Happy to be here.
Yeah, I'd love to hear. I know that you have a lot of experience with Sysmon, so I'd love to hear a little bit about that. You've contributed to the Sysmon community guide. You've had a bunch of YouTube videos about learning how to use Sysmon. So we're really excited. I know your expertise is going to be really valuable here. Tell me a little bit about how you've worked with Sysmon and Trusted Sec.
Well, I've been blogging and writing about Sysmon since Sysmon 1.0. As you mentioned, I'm the author of the Sysmon community guide. So at Trusted Sec, one of the things that we noticed was that a lot of customers didn't know a lot about Sysmon, and sadly, Microsoft doesn't provide documentation. So one of the things that we did is that we actually reverse engineer a lot of stuff in Sysmon, learn how it works, and we came up with our own internal guide that then we made public. In addition to that, I recorded and we've been publishing over 20 videos on Sysmon, our Learning Sysmon series in the Trusted Sec YouTube channel. I recorded all of those. I think we're on video 18, I believe, this week. In addition to that, I wrote the PS Gumshoe PowerShell module, which actually has a bunch of functions inside of it that allows you to work easier with Sysmon.
Excellent. So we're super excited to talk to you about this. Clearly, you're a very seasoned expert about Sysmon, and I'm sure you have a lot to teach us. So we're super excited. Thanks for joining us, Carlos.
Happy to be here.
Awesome. We also have Amanda Berlin. Amanda, you've been on quite a few webinars here at Blumira before, but I'd love to introduce you to those who don't know you. You're the lead incident detection engineer here at Blumira. Tell me a little bit about what you do here. Looks like you might be
helps
muted.
Helps if I'm unmuted.
There you go.
I've done all these webinars, but I still can't find the unmute button. So I've been here since the beginning of Blumira, and just create cool detections all day and get to look at logs and run things in the lab, and run a great team of people that do the same thing. So it's a whole lot of fun. I've not done anything super great with Sysmon other than create detections around it. But yeah, it's been a whole lot of fun.
You did write our #1 performing article about enabling Sysmon. So give yourself some credit there. And I know that you've made some contributions around like Logmira. We'll talk about that a little bit later. Yep. But super excited to have you on, and let's jump into it. So what is Sysmon? Carlos, do you want to give us the quick explainer of what it is for those who might not know?
Sure. So Sysmon is short for System Monitor. It's actually a free utility as part of Sysinternals from Microsoft. So you can install it on all of your systems for free, with the caveat that you need to remember there's no support from Microsoft on the tool itself. But what it actually provides you is that it enhances your capability of monitoring or being targeted in what you want to monitor in a system for certain behaviors. And all of that data is actually stored in the event log, which makes your life a lot simpler, because we already have a bunch of tools that are able to parse and extract information from the event log and feed that information into our SIEM platform. And also we have tools for threat hunting and others that already know how to work with that specific source of information.
Excellent. Thank you for that explanation. It looks like we've got some folks who know what it is, but that's about it. Some folks have the basics down, and then a few folks have never heard of it. So it's a great explanation for all of those people. And yeah, you talked a little bit about how it gives a higher level of monitoring to events, let's talk about the difference between Windows logging and Sysmon. First of all, let's give an explanation for Windows logging for those who might not understand what that is. Amanda, do you want to do a quick explainer there?
Sure. So Windows logging is, I mean, basically what it sounds like. By default, it doesn't actually log a whole lot. It does log certain things like successful logins and, when applications are being installed, that kind of stuff. But by default, it doesn't really, log all of the things that you would want it to log for security reasons. They use different event IDs to track those. So an event ID isn't necessarily specific to that event channel. So you have different channels like application security setup. There's more specific ones as of 2008 R2. They actually came out with advanced logging and auditing. So you can actually create a whole bunch more logs around very, very specific things. And Sysmon is another one of those event channels. So technically you could have, event ID 1 in the Sysmon channel. You could also have event ID 1 in, one of those other channels. So you have to keep that in mind. But yeah, it tracks a lot of what you're doing on a Windows-based system.
Thank you. So here's an overview of what the default Windows auditing will give you as opposed to Sysmon. So could you kind of give a quick explainer of maybe some of these things that Windows auditing doesn't have? Like how important is, the process access, clipboard change, process tampering? Are those pretty key capabilities that you should be catching in a Windows system?
I believe they are. In fact, if you've ever done any IR or you've gone through threat hunting, one of the things that you're going to notice is that depending how you configure your environment, you can be overflooded with information. The advantage that Sysmon provides you is that you can be very targeted via configurations. So that means that you're only ingesting into your environment what really matters. In addition to that, they add a bunch of, let's call metadata, additional data that you can use. If, for example, logon IDs, they get reused. If you're not logging log on and log off, that will give you a logon ID for that specific piece of time in that specific machine that then you have to go through and look all of the processes and events that have that. Where with Sysmon, we have logon GUID, a unique GUID per machine, per session, that makes your life a lot easier when you're doing all of your queries. Same thing for processes. We have process GUIDs. And then Sysmon ties that information across all of the other events, which makes threat hunting much, much, much simpler. You don't have to do those conversions where your process monitoring includes everything in hex, and then you have to turn it into decimals so you can actually use it in other event logs for threat hunting. So Sysmon came from a team that was actually using this at Microsoft for hunting inside of Azure so they could gain more telemetry as part of their blue team tools that they have there. In fact, there's two versions, the internal and the external. And they decided to grab a bunch of the different features that they are already using inside of Microsoft and make those public. So it is not a replacement for Windows auditing. It's just an enhancement to it for specific areas that could speed up your process for incident response.
Good to know. And I think that you had mentioned in our meeting before this that there are some things with Windows logging that's a nightmare to do if you haven't had Sysmon enabled. Like I think you mentioned DNS queries. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Sure. So when it for Windows event log, if I want to use DNS queries, if I want to log pipe names or some other areas like create remote threat, I need to know first of all that information is somewhere inside of the event log. I need to know which event, and sometimes I need to enable ETW or log tracing to be able to get those events. And then I'm just getting the fire hose of all of those events. I cannot filter for specific pipe names. I cannot filter for specific DNS queries. If I enable the DNS client, for example, on a machine, what is going to happen is I'm going to get flooded with a bunch of DNS queries inside of my SIEM that's going to consume space, which also costs money and also makes it harder to query data. I've been to customers that have petabytes inside of their SIEM, And doing queries inside of them, it's awesome that they have that amount of data, but it means that I can only do 5-minute query windows without overstressing the environment. So yeah, the advantage there is that with Sysmon, I'm able to be targeted. I have less data, but more relevant data. And when Windows auditing, I'm able to track other areas that I can have that either leave it on the machine as a backup, or I can bring them in and correlate in addition to other areas that Sysmon doesn't cover very well, like WMI query failures. I can have that in WMI operational, but I don't have it in Sysmon. So it's complementary between each one and the other.
Yeah, I don't know if you'd ever want to do Sysmon and turn off everything else. You would lose a significant amount either way.
I've seen that happen, sadly.
Oof. Oof. Like, that's fine. We don't need any Windows logging. Yes.
So, like when they install an EDR and it says, oh, we have an EDR. We don't need to enable logs or anything. And then you have an event and you're going like, okay,
let me tell you, EDRs do not log that well.
No.
There are not many EDRs that log super well.
Or that are configured well. A lot of people go next, reboot. Sure. Oh, it's done. It's working.
Yeah.
It can be a whole separate webinar.
Oh, yeah.
So we do have a question from the audience. Victor asked, do things like process access include critical systems like SSH and CMD?
Yes, you can configure it to monitor for SSH.exe as well as CMD.exe. So you can monitor for both of those inside of Windows systems. So you can say, hey, my SSHD.exe process, I want to monitor if somebody accesses that process. That means that somebody may be tampering in memory or maybe extracting data credentials from memory. Microsoft has done a very good job in the case of SSHD.exe, protecting the memory inside of there to clear it out. But let's say password managers. That's one where I've seen where at least at the red team at TrustedSec, we've had very good success retrieving passwords from memory from the password manager, because even though they get cleared out in a couple of minutes, we still have a window of time where we can actually extract that from memory. So being able to monitor those critical services for anything that is accessing that process is very important.
Good to know. So would you say if someone just has the default Windows auditing enabled, they're missing out on a good amount of information without Sysmon? Yes.
Also tuning. Every SIEM out there allows you to filter for what you ingest, but a lot of customers don't do it. And they go like, oh, no, I'm not enabling Windows auditing too many logs because it overflows my system, or they install Sysmon by default without any rules. And then they go like, hey, I'm getting overflooded with messages. Everything requires that you know your tools and you spend time tuning those tools for your specific, I wouldn't say the entire company, but for specific sectors. Mm-hmm. Amanda and I will use Visual Studio Code that generates a bunch of noise. And we have MS Build, and we have other tools that look funny that should be normal for us. But if you're talking Cindy from marketing or from accounting and you're starting to see MS Build pop up, like, she's not compiling code. She should never be compiling code.
Right.
So let's talk a little bit about some other things that Sysmon offers. So we recommend that all of our customers will enable Sysmon just because of the increased visibility that it provides. But overall, I think that Sysmon just provides a whole wealth of benefits to both our customers and also to everyone that is using a Windows environment and wants to get more out of their logs. Incident response is one of those benefits. Amanda, I'd love to hear your perspective as to what Sysmon does for incident response, how it helps there.
Yeah, sure. So I let me give you an example of a customer that didn't have it versus one that did. I mean, a lot of us, I'm sure, have heard of the different proxy logon, proxy shell, all the Exchange vulnerabilities over the last couple of years. A lot of people still run their own local Exchange, right? Even though I've been dealing with misconfigured and unpatched Exchange now for what seems like forever. It happens a lot. Well, we actually had one customer that did not have Sysmon installed. They did not know that their Exchange server was compromised until they saw PS exec commands running inside their network, right? From one DMZ host to the inside to somewhere else. They actually saw it. At that point, their Exchange server was already ransomed. So compare that, which, once it's ransomed, there's a lot before that you probably could have detected on Sysmon or not. And other customers that have had Sysmon enabled, you can see so much, right? If it were that same attack, you would have seen commands being run that normally shouldn't be run on an Exchange server, people trying to mount drives, people trying to authenticate to other things and password spraying and being denied, running weird, like the IIS process, just like spawning PowerShell. There's a lot of things that you can see pre-compromise that if you don't have Sysmon, you're rarely going to see. And like trying to track those back and let the customer know, like during an engagement, at least on our side, because we don't do like IR, right? I'm sure. So Trusted Sec has some great IR people. So Tyler is phenomenal. And you can see a lot more like when you're on site or whatever, but if you don't have stuff going to a SIEM or you're not able to capture those logs in time doing an IR, you may not know where they got in. You may, other than the fact that their Exchange server was ransomed, who knows what avenue they got into your network on. And having that extra logging capability will at least you'll be able to track them process by process and box by box and command and all of that kind of stuff in an engagement.
Yeah, in fact, I'm in an engagement with Tyler, and having the ability of just having any logs, it's so important. You'd be surprised how many times we go into an IR and we go like, okay, where are the logs? We don't have them. Okay, can we have access to the host? Oh, we rebooted it. And then all of that memory forensics goes away. Yeah.
It's more expensive at that point for an IR engagement if they don't have that prepared for you.
Yes, it's a lot more hours.
Yeah.
Especially for ransomware, because the problem with ransomware is that you cannot start recovery until you found root cause. Like, how did they gain access, and on what machines are their beachheads that they're using to spread the ransomware? Until you haven't found patient zero, or how they got in and how they're spreading and all of the IOCs, so you can hunt for all of those machines, you cannot start recovery. Because they'll just get back in, you'll piss them off, and they'll ask for more money, or they'll release information out to the wild.
Yeah, makes sense. And Amanda, you had mentioned the ISS process. Isn't that how we detected the Move It exploit recently? A web shell.
I know it was a reverse. Yeah, it was a web shell detection. I don't remember if process was related or not. I think maybe.
It sounded familiar to me, but do you want to chat briefly about how we use Sysmon to detect that?
Yeah, so that's another entire webinar, right? Is detection engineering and how you how you prioritize everything. Like it's like whack-a-mole, right? When you're trying to figure out what detections are more important, or if you should work on this O-Day, whatever. We try to focus on behavior rather than always trying to track down specific IOCs. So this was like some kind of detection we had created a while ago it was just web shells. Maybe it was IIS. I'd have to look at it again, but a web shell running on a web server. And it's based on specific files that are dropped that you may or may not, mean to be there. And yeah, that was one of the exploits that Move It was using.
Just messaged in the chat an excellent article that our CTO wrote about the experience of detecting the Move It exploit, as well as the importance of monitoring behaviors versus indicators of compromise, and definitely worth the read. So moving on to the other benefits of Sysmon, incident response is a great use case there. Just wanted to mention that it is completely free to deploy. There are caveats to that, though. If you do have a SIEM, that it does charge based on log ingestion. So if you are ingesting all those extra data points that Sysmon can generate for you, then there's kind of a double-edged sword to that. Carlos, have you dealt with any customers that don't necessarily want to deploy Sysmon because of the extra costs that it can incur if you're using a SIEM that does charge based on that?
Yes, I've seen it a lot, and it's one of those things where I'm always discussing with the customer is that if you're using it properly, the cost is not going to be high. It all depends on the amount of investment in terms of times and resources that you want to put in to tune your configurations. Mm-hmm. And what are you going to monitor? But very many times when I talk with customers, I go like, okay, have you mapped what systems go with what business process, and what are your top business processes that are critical for your infrastructure, and which ones are the ones that are more at risk from an attacker because they're receiving emails and opening certain types of files, they're exposed to the web, and many times that risk analysis has never happened. And then they just go like, oh no, but I want to deploy to every machine and collect everything. Go like, no, you do it gradually. You do it to whichever is critical, because time is money and disk space is money and licenses is money. So you many times from the security perspective, the security teams think holistically everything at once instead of the business side of it. And when you start breaking down everything into its business purpose, value, and then you do a risk analysis and all of that, you gain kind of like that perspective that will tell you, where should I focus? Where should I invest my time and money? Or even, do we have the support from management to embed that time and money? A solution from Sysmon is one that I always tell customers. Sysmon is for mature customers. If you're starting out with your security environment, you should wait until you have somebody to guide you, or you build in that expertise internally. It's not like next reboot and we're okay. It requires tuning, it requires planning, so you know what you're bringing on. For example, one of the questions that we're getting is that somebody, their C/Sysmon folder is filling up. More than likely, my assumption would be that they grab a configuration from somewhere else. They apply that configuration. They're looking for file deletion, file wiping. There's a lot of products out there that do that by default, and they need to be excluded. And somebody is one of those images or processes is constantly deleting files. They're being saved there into that folder. But yeah, that folder, so you have that evidence of a malicious piece of software that somebody tried to remove from the machine, that they dropped that DLL, they dropped that executable. Now they're trying to delete it. What happens if your Intune is not excluded from there, or you're using Alteris and you're not excluding? Every time you do batch management, you're doubling the amount of space that's being consumed there because you don't have that monitoring and processes in to be able to clean that. That's why many times I tell customers, go with the detection rather than the archiving. Once you have the detection completely, very well set, very well documented, which are your targets, then you start archiving slowly and you start enabling those more advanced capabilities, because you need to build upon that so your cost doesn't grow as you're doing that.
Yeah, and I've seen it too where people are not specific enough sometimes and actually ignore a lot of the things that they should be tracking with Sysmon, right? So it's definitely a balance. You have to be very prescribed about trying to get the right stuff.
What are some of those things that they're often missing, Amanda?
I mean, I've seen entire event IDs kind of just be stripped just maybe not in the entire event ID, just a lot of blind spots. It's kind of like when you allow list things, right? If you're allow listing, all of the program files directory, you're gonna miss out on a lot if you're not very prescriptive of. I think there's a good example in the chat. People don't change it to tune out the Splunk universal forwarder, right? So that's very specific.
Good to know. We talked a little bit about the benefits of Sysmon, and we alluded to this a little earlier, but love to delve into what specifically Sysmon can detect. That suspicious behavior component of things. Amanda, what are you seeing in our customers' environment that Sysmon is able to detect? We talked about the move it exploit, any really major malicious behaviors that you're seeing.
Oh man, I should have prepped for that one.
That's okay. I don't mean to put you in the
spot. Let me see here.
I think we've already provided some pretty good examples about the move it exploit. We're going to talk about process creation in a little bit and why that's an important one to detect with Sysmon. Carlos, if you have any other ideas, feel free to throw those out.
Process creation is critical. We land in a box. We need to create processes to do stuff. The other one's file creation. We need to, at some point in our initial stage, even though every red teamer out there that goes to a HackerCon will go, oh, we live in memory, we don't create IOCs. Yes, you do. There's this thing called the low card exchange principle in forensics, which any object that interacts with another object is going to leave a trace. Same thing is for the digital world. So at one point or another, you need to send them a lure, you need to send them a file that somebody has to double click, or an exploit needs to upload something into the machine and then execute it, or there's a web shell that gets created, or there's an MHDA file that gets created, a JScript, an XC, a DLL for persistence. All of that stuff just going by behavior and having the process logging enabled at least gives you the idea where you can normalize your environment. You can go like, okay, this is my normal. I can exclude it out. And I can focus on what is the abnormal. What are my unique things that are going to happen? Because when we do stuff on a machine, we're going to be doing stuff which is not normal behavior for that user. And the very first one that covers the most MITRE techniques is just process creation. Like it gives you a ton of information that you can start working on, and then you can start adding to that.
Yeah, so I pulled up we have like this dashboard that tells us a bunch of stuff about our detections. We have over 20% of our entire detection stack. So that's across all types of data. 20% of that is event ID 1. That's how important process creation is. That is included in all of our detections. And above that is 4688, which is the Windows version, and then event ID 11.
Yeah, it's good to have a backup. That's why I like enabling both 4688 and command line on it, and at the same time having Sysmon. Many times an attacker will go in, and depending on their privilege level, they'll go like, okay, I'm going to disable process creation, and they haven't noticed that Sysmon's on the machine, or Sysmon has been configured so the process is not Sysmon and the service is not Sysmon, and they missed that one. So having those backups, those levels of redundancy, I do like having those always on an environment.
Well, I remember in our meeting earlier, Carlos, you said you cry tears of joy when you see that a customer has enabled process creation and is tracking for that. So definitely good to know.
Especially when we do IRs, yes.
Yeah, I was going to say, from an IR perspective, it's a very good move.
Yeah. And here's a graph that you shared, Carlos, with us, which I thought was great, just highlighting just these are the top behaviors that Sysmon is detecting, correct? Do you want to give some more context around this graph?
Those are the ones from MITRE. So when you look at MITRE and you look at all of the techniques, they have in MITRE, they have what they call sources. And the sources for detection for those techniques, when we break them out for every ID inside of MITRE, you can see that command execution, process creation are kind of like the top ones. So just having 4688 or having Sysmon event ID number 1 very well tuned in your environment, it pays dividends in terms of detection. You have a very large amount of coverage. After that, it is just file creation in the case of Sysmon. You have network traffic, which you can add, but that requires a bit more expertise on your side to be able to push different Sysmon configurations to different systems. For example, many times I'll tell them like, hey, just start with your domain controllers. Network traffic there should be very well controlled, and you can start there. Then you branch out to other servers, and then last your desktops. And you go like, yeah, but my desktops are more exposed. And I go like, yes, but it's a lot more work that you need to put in. Better to get the process down and have it very well documented, have a testing and structure already set for your configuration, because it's important. If I write a detection and config in Sysmon, I better have a test for it.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you've worked with Sysmon, all of a sudden stuff breaks. Like Amanda and I were talking about customers that put multiple EDRs and AVs on the machine, and they go like, oh, Sysmon sucks, or this other product sucks because this one detected it, but this one didn't. Well, there's this thing called filter drivers, and Microsoft puts those in between the API call and the disk or any of the other APIs. And if a product intercepts that and says, this is malicious and I blocked it, every other driver in that stack that has been loaded, which Sysmon uses a driver, every AV uses a driver, they won't see it. So it is not that they suck, it's that they never got the data. And that is a common misunderstanding that I see with many organizations and their tools.
Yeah, I just launched a poll asking if folks have tested their Sysmon configuration, and a lot of people either don't know how to or haven't, or actually don't even know what testing Sysmon means. So do you want to share some best practices around that, or just briefly explain how people can get started with that?
Sure. So in the case of let's say pipe names, there are multiple programs out there, even from MITRE, there's Red Canary. There are others that actually simulate several attacks, and they have a very good set of scripts where you can write specific behaviors that you want to track with Sysmon that then you can use for validation. Others, you can simply script it yourself. Like, hey, for example, this is my normal behavior, this is my normal image. I want to test my excludes. That's very easy. You just set up a machine like you regularly do with all of the different components. You apply your configuration, you do a couple of reboots, let it sit there for a couple of minutes, and then you check back. Am I overlogging? Am I getting more data than I should? That means that I'm not excluding some other behavior for this specific type of build, either for marketing or for development or for IT, because each machine is going to be different with different processes. For example, many times, Sysmon security configuration file is awesome. It's a great learning tool. Is it one that I would deploy to every machine in my network? No, I would test it out because she has a series of exclusions for some machines, but they probably do not apply to my environment. And I've never tested that. In fact, one of the biggest things that I get feedback on when I do training is when I go over Sysmon rule orders. Like, how do they differ depending how you write them? Because if Sysmon, all of a sudden you have a rule that triggered, because it's very wide, it encompasses a lot of stuff, other rules below it won't see it for that specific event type. So you need to make sure that when you're adding those rules, that specific rules for some specific behavior, that you can write your own executable or your own way of testing it, even if the path changes. You just have kind of like, hey, this specific rule, our test is with this other path, with this executable that we wrote, which could be as something as a simple hello world that we path arguments to, just to validate against arguments.
That's good to know. Thank you, Carlos, for that explanation. So earlier we had talked about, and one thing I also want to mention that Amanda had talked to me about is that we will test for Sysmon on behalf of our customers, right? So Amanda, can you share a little bit about that?
Sure. So we're not going to obviously test if you have any custom configs that you write in Sysmon, because there's really no way of us knowing, unless I guess if you ask. But yeah, we usually use Sysmon modular. We've used the Swift on Security one before. I put both of them in there as links, and yeah, that's how we do our detection engineering. We come up with an idea for a detection. We go to the lab and we either run the tool if it's a command from or a script from Atomic Red Team. We do that sometimes. Other times we go a little bit deeper and see if there's any other ways you can shortcut or obfuscate commands. And yeah, we just build all of that in. And if Sysmon ever gets, if we ever update the config, sometimes we ask for modifications or whatever.
Good to know. And that hopefully takes some of the heavy lifting off of our customers as well. So there's a lot of, yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of chatter in the chat and in the Q&A about different configs of Sysmon. So let's talk about that. One of the things that we had talked about in our prep meeting for this is not just installing it with the default config. Carlos, do you want to share what you think that the problem is associated with that?
And in the case of, if I enable it with my default config and that's the only thing I have, it's better than nothing. The problem is that it's logging way too much information, as people mentioned. It's logging every process termination, every driver load. And I think it adds also file create stream hash. It also gets logged by default, if I'm not mistaken, and it uses SHA-256. So what happens if I'm not using SHA-256, I'm using SHA-1 in my SOC for threat hunting? It doesn't jive there. A lot of logs, a lot of noise. That means that I need to parse. So it's important not to go with that default config. It is just go in, tune it specifically for what you need. So typically I just start with one, which is everything's disabled in it. And I just start adding slowly from normal behavior. So that's something that I go over in my videos a lot, where I just go, here's my system. I'll grab the normal behavior, and then I wrote a bunch of PowerShell scripts that I demo there that is inside of the PowerShell PS Gumshoe, where I pipe that info and I create already all of my exclusion rules that I can add, and I can just start filtering out there. And then I can just start building my other parts of my rule set, which are specific targeted events that I want to have. And not every event type can be configured that way. For example, you have pipe names. There's just way too many pipe names, random pipe names that are always happening. You cannot exclude them all. You're going to leave yourself with a bunch of gaps. That is one where it's better just to be targeted for specific known bad behavior in that environment. Same thing for network connections. If I want to be targeted, I want to kind of like make life living hell for any red teamer or any attacker in my machines, that they need to move laterally to be able to achieve what they want if they didn't land on the specific box that they always wanted. So if I look, so how do we move laterally? We abuse management protocols. So that means that either for enumeration, so LDAP, Kerberos, 445 SMB, and then we start looking for remote desktop, for WMI, RPC calls 135 to 139. We start looking for SSH. We start looking for Telnet. There's still a lot of networking devices out there that use Telnet. And you look for all of those admin protocols and you create a rule that says, these are my normal applications or normal processes and their parent process that connect here. Anything outside of this, I want it logged. And I can set a tag for it, even if I want. So I can just put a name of suspicious. So when I do my queries in my SIEM every morning with my coffee, I can look, hey, give me suspicious behavior so I can start looking as I start my day.
Awesome. Thank you, Carlos. Amanda, how do we at Blumira, kind of manage the configuration as well as the updating of Sysmon for our customers?
It's a great question. That's a different department.
Okay.
I know we recommend using Sysmon Modular, and we usually go through when we onboard people. It's part of our standard onboarding process. Because before we included in our standard onboarding process, we were finding that less than 5% of organizations that came to us actually had Sysmon installed. So we're like, you know what? Now everybody gets it, because we don't want to ask anymore. Everybody's gonna install Sysmon.
Right.
So yeah, we suggest the Sysmon modular after some testing. Right. Sometimes it can be a little much depending on the server. It can be, we've seen problems, not necessarily with with certain versions of the process, but we've seen problems with if you turn on too much with Sysmon modular on certain systems, and if you have you don't have an SSD, if you actually have spinning disks, sometimes it can overwhelm your drives. So we have a whole support team that deals with that and the updating and the communication around it.
Thanks for that. And sorry to put you on the spot there, but
no, it's all right.
Great explanation of it. Appreciate it. So let's talk about some best practices for using Sysmon in general. We've talked about testing it. We've talked about the configuration that you might want to use. But overall, just using Sysmon in general, taking a high level approach to it is something that we recommend as well, just not necessarily going so granular into one single event, but looking at patterns en masse. And that kind of goes back to the article I shared that Matt wrote about detecting behaviors over time. Carlos, from a pen testing perspective, what does that mean to you? Like testing for, detecting behaviors rather than IOCs?
So when it comes there, normally for detecting behaviors, I see it in two different ways. One is that you learn your environment and how different parts of your environment behave. And then you look for the outliers. And the other one is there are going to be specific attacks that are happening that are going to have a specific chain of events. For example, people are going to be creating files in the download folders. So typically what I download, Outlook temporary. So I use the ADS or a file stream hash enabled there, because at the very least I get zone identifiers. I'm going to learn from where they downloaded that file, because that's part of the behavior of Windows. So I'm looking for specific behaviors that are going to be associated with an attack. I'm going to have general rules. And then the other one is I'm going to have rules where I'm going to be excluding normal behavior. And then I'm going to look for the outliers, which is what I'm going to have in my logs.
Awesome. Thanks, Carlos. And we had also talked about approaching Sysmon as a process. We kind of touched upon this earlier. It needs to be tuned, updated, verified. It's not necessarily set it and forget it sort of thing. Amanda, do you have any thoughts on that as opposed as, in regards to just treating Sysmon like an overall part of your security program?
Yeah, I mean, it's like with most things. I don't know if there's many things in security or tech that you can kind of just set it and forget it. Like people do all the time. Don't get me wrong. Like you can. It's probably not going to have any crazy impacts on anything, but are you going to have the best possible detections or best possible logging that you probably can? No. It's definitely a continuous process, just like going through and tuning firewall rules, going through and updating your policies, like everything that all of us do all of the time constantly needs iteration. So yeah, that's usually my answer, is just keep doing everything all the time.
Yeah, there's no panacea. There's no even though when you talk with salespeople from every company, including the ones where I work and for Amanda, they'll tell you, no, our product's the best, it does all of this stuff. But one of the things that you have to remember is that not every environment is the same. When I go to a pharmaceutical, I'm still going to find Windows 2000 in it. I go into a SCADA system, I'm going to find even NT4 sometimes. And then I go into a startup and there's no AD. 80% is Macs, a couple of Windows, and everything's Google Cloud. Then I go into another enterprise and startup, let's say, a lot of startups in the West Coast, we see a lot of Macs, a lot of startups in the East Coast, we start seeing a lot of Azure AD being used and Intune, which changes completely the entire behavior for lateral movement. It changes the entire behavior of attack techniques that somebody would use. It changes the platforms that are being used. Same thing, I've even seen it in Europe versus the US. Different products, different configurations, different environments, different politics internally that affect how you structure stuff.
Yeah, makes sense. I mean, that's why we're saying here that Sysmon is such a vital part of getting visibility. You know, Blumira is great, of course, but you need information from other sources to really have that true visibility over your environment, which is why we suggest to our customers to do that with Sysmon, and that's a great way to do it for free with us. I know we're getting, sorry, Amanda, do you have something you wanted to add?
Yeah, one question. Somebody asked if you could link your YouTube channel and videos.
Oh, yeah. Yes, I placed it in one of the answers, and I'm going to now put it in the main chat. So you look for the playlist, look for the one that says Learning Sysmon.
Awesome. Thanks for that, Carlos. Yeah, that is a great video series that if you want more information about the things that we're talking about here, definitely a great thing to go and watch. So I know we're getting to the top of the hour here. So I just wanted to talk quickly about how Blumira ties into Sysmon. Towards that last slide, it was, you know, we we're talking about centralizing your logs, because without centralizing your logs and getting alerted, Sysmon is, you know, going to be really difficult to wade through and get true value from. And Blumira is one way to do that, centralizing your logs. We are a cloud SIEM. We also just released our XDR, so Extended Detection Response platform, I believe last month, which is really exciting, and it introduces some more automated capabilities into our platform. We are dedicated towards small and medium businesses, to those small IT teams that don't necessarily have a lot of security expertise. We're extremely easy to get up and running. And our free version, you can deploy that very quickly in a matter of hours and really dig into that and learn specifically like what we'll detect on. You'll realize some immediate security value pretty quickly just by using our free edition. And that's one way to test Blumira out and see if we're right for you. Amanda here is the lead incident detection engineer and writes our detections. Amanda, do you have anything that you wanted to talk about with that? Maybe talk about how great our detection engineering team is.
I mean, personally, I think we're the best, but I'm very
not biased or anything.
Yeah, biased. It is definitely an up and coming kind of role that different organizations have. Because people are realizing that you can't really run and detect on all of the things and keep a SIEM going unless you have a very large security staff. So it's nice having that as like a dedicated gig, just because it's personally for me, it's a lot of fun. It's kind of purple team-ish, right? Where you're doing the attacking and detecting.
Yeah, it's awesome. And you're really being able to be a resource for those folks that don't have the resources within their internal team. You know, if you're working on a team of 1 to 2 and maybe you're stretched thin between IT and security tasks, having that detection engineering team as well as our support team is really enabling you to kind of have like an alternative SOC. So you really have that visibility over your environment in ways that you wouldn't already. So feel free to check us out. Blumira.com/free is one way to get started. You can also talk to our sales team, ask for a demo, and feel free to answer the poll that is up to see if you want to talk more with us. We're happy to answer any questions and chat with you further. And I also wanted to give time to Carlos just to talk about Trusted Sec and what you do there. Carlos, tell me a little bit about it.
So we're a company based out of Ohio. It was founded by Dave Kennedy, and we provide security consulting in multiple areas. So if you need a pen test, we have those. Same thing as red team engagement, as we have mentioned throughout the series. We also, or the webinar itself, we also do IR. That is one of our services that we do provide. But in addition to that, some of the ones that a lot of people don't know about is that we also do purple teaming. So all of a sudden you're building out all of your detections and you think that you have it very well set before you actually do a red team engagement or a pen test. Probably you may want to do a purple team where we go in, we simulate several attacks, we validate that those detections are working properly, we find gaps, and we address those. In addition to that, we have advisory services where we advise you for better policies inside your environment, how to better tune them for your specific environment, and relations that you have inside of that one, as well as cloud services. A lot of people right now, if you're trying to get certified, let's say for Azure, you know that it's constantly changing. Same thing with AWS. So we do offer cloud services to aid with that brand new complex environment that all of us are now moving in or are operating in and are at a loss sometimes as we work in those.
Great. Thanks for that explanation. It sounds like you guys have a lot of different services that would be really helpful to the folks that are tuning in here. So thank you. And we had talked about this a little bit before, but you have a wonderful Learning Sysmon series on YouTube. Feel free to go check that out at youtube.com at TrustedSecTV. Carlos, tell me about what it's been like to create that series. Has that been fun for you?
Yes, it's been very interesting. You'll see that a lot of people give me compliments about my lighting and camera setup right now, but you're going to learn very quickly when you start seeing the initial videos that it was a learning process to get here. You'll see the video, audio actually improve across as I learned video editing and about audio engineering and lighting. I broke it down based on our training that we did for DoD, both for the Air Force and the Marine Corps. And one of the things that I try to go is in the series itself, I'm brutally honest. I'll tell you what works, what doesn't work. There's no fluff in it. Sometimes I did make my boss cringe a bit about my honesty in the videos, but they accepted it. They didn't make me edit stuff out. So I'll tell it like it is in terms of Sysmon, what works, what doesn't, stuff that you need to be aware of, specifically when you're building the XML, how to plan out your rules, how to test stuff. So I really hope that you guys find it useful for you. The last couple of videos are going to be posted every Monday. I think there's like 4 more videos that need to be posted. So do check out until video number 22. And I go per event type on each one, so you can start building those configs slowly.
Awesome.
You should have numbered your videos with the event ID. So, you know, video number 1.
Actually, I was actually thinking about that until then I go to registry. Then I was going to have like a 3-minute video on one registry event, then a 3-minute video on another one, and go like, oh no, registry access. I initially started doing it similarly like that, but then I got the feedback like, oh, can you break it down per task? It will make it a lot easier. And I go like, yeah, it makes sense. Yeah. What do you want to target? And that's when I switch around video 6 or 7, I think.
Love it. Well, feel free to check out that series, everyone. Seems like a great continuation of the conversation we've had here. And thank you so much for tuning in. I hope you learned a bit about Sysmon. I know I did. And Carlos and Amanda, thank you so much for devoting your time and your expertise here. This has been great.
Definitely.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Hope you have a great rest of your week and a